welcome to the meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee, which is at its unusual time today at 2 o'clock. I can't remember having a 2 o'clock meeting for 6 years now, so this may well become the norm in the future. I don't know. I've had a bit of lobbying on this, so it might happen. Well, it is going to happen. If you've got any mobile phones, can you please switch them off? And this is a meeting that's been publicly webcast to members of the public. Apparently there's no fire test planned for today, so we won't be having one, and if it does happen, it's real. Just a quick introduction. I'm Councillor Mohammed Maroof, Chair of this committee, and we'll go with the members and then go around.
Councillor Fran Belbin, Deputy Chair of the committee.
Councillor Gareth Slater, Southey Ward.
Councillor Simon Clement-Jones, Bridgeford and Greenhill.
Good afternoon, my name's Diane Hurst. I'm an elected member for Richmond Ward.
Please.
Philippa Burdett from Democratic Services.
David Hollis, General Counsel.
Philip Gregory, Director of Finance and Commercial Services.
Jane Wilby, Head of Accounting.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. The apologies for absence are from Councillor Maroof Rauf and the independent member Alison Howard. We do have a report on today's agenda, which is item number 13. I think it says 12, but it's 13, which is excluded from the press and public because the report contains exempt information described in paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended. When we get to this item, we will pause the webcast and ask any public or press in attendance to leave the meeting. And thank you for bearing with me reading that, because it has to be done precisely, apparently, for the minutes, so we've got it correct there. Any members wish to declare any interest, or there's no declarations of interest? Thank you so much for that. Minutes of the previous meeting. Can members approve as a correct record the meeting minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of December 2024? That's correct, Philippa, that's fine. Public questions and petitions. We don't have any public questions or petitions which have been submitted this time, so we'll move straight on to item 7, which is the annual governance statement. And just for people listening in, this is something that we've been building up on for the last probably 5 or 6 months. So it is something that members are generally tend to be aware of. So sometimes you don't get as many questions as you probably expect you should do on an item like this, but members have been pretty much briefed on it from the beginning. So what I would ask is, I think it's got it down as presenting officer Rob Parkin, but I'm assuming I can't see Rob here, so it'd be young David Hollis. Just basically highlight what we need to be aware of and what the issues are, and then we'll open it up to member questions, if I may. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Chair. This is the annual governance statement for 23-24. Regular viewers will know that this is the 3rd annual governance statement that we've approved this year, but hopefully we'll now be back on track with normal timescales from next year. Just a reminder that the annual governance statement is a high-level overview. It's not intended to be a detailed analysis of each of the item within it, but it's a high-level overview and covers the main items that have been determined through the annual review of governance, which is a requirement under the relevant legislation. This annual governance statement for this year was published as a draft in June with the unaudited accounts. However, since it was published, it's had significant update and revision since then. Presentationally, excuse me, it's been improved and reordered, and hopefully it should flow a lot better than previous versions have done. There's also been a significant review of the content. The original one was based primarily on the Director's Assurance piece of work, which is undertaken each year. That is work that is done through a questionnaire with each director in the organisation, and is done at the end of the financial year looking backwards. We've had regards to the comments that have and questions that have been raised in relation to previous versions of the AGS since the draft was published, and we've taken those on board. We've also had regard to further work we've been doing with SIPFA around the presentation and the content of the annual governance statement, and also at the present time SIPFA and Solace are consulting on an addendum to the guidance, and we've had regard to that, although that was published relatively recently, so we've not been able to have full cognizance of that, and it is only draft subject to consultation at the moment. So hopefully future years will now take more account of that revised guidance once it's through from SIPFA and Solace. We've looked at the best practice of other local authorities. What is clear is that there's no common format or agreement on the content of the review or how it should be presented, but we have taken some of the best practice that we've seen in other reports as well. And what we have also considered is input from external assessments and regulators throughout the relevant year. All of the no assurance and limited assurance audit reports have been considered, and the views of internal audit have also fed into the contents of this version. Each strategic director and their directorate leadership teams have considered the version that you've got before you and have signed it off. And finally, Strategy Leadership Board and Corporate Assurance Board have considered it. The overall assessment, as you'll see from the document, is that while the Council's governance arrangements are adequate, there is more that the Council can do to ensure it delivers its planned outcomes effectively. And I think it is worth reflecting that this is a look back over 23-24, and some of those improvements have been delivered throughout the remainder of 24 or are in process of being delivered at the present time and through the next year. The format of the report sets out those items that have been raised as governance issues within the current year, and also a review of the matters raised in previous years and an update on those. I'll not go through each of those in turn, but I will take questions on them if there are any. What it also does, what I would say about some of those, and recognise that there are repeat items from previous years, things that are back again and don't seem to have been resolved. Those will have particular attention this year, and now that we've set up the Corporate Assurance Board, the Corporate Assurance Board will monitor those, look at them throughout the year and look at the performance on those, and there will be escalation to Strategy Leadership Board or this committee if it's felt necessary throughout the year to ensure that progress is made on those. Finally, the thing I want to say is that there's a summary of the updates in governance throughout the year. Those are both positive things that have happened during the year, but also other things that have been reported that touch on governance. Some of those are things that public would expect to see, things like the street tree inquiry and the containers report, but there are also things that people won't be aware of, but it's right to highlight those there. So I don't intend to go through the report line by line, but if there are any particular questions, I'm happy to take.
Thank you so much, David. I think members would have read the reports anyway, so we'll open it up to questions. Gareth?
Page 42 regarding the PDRs. Are those dashboards complete? When will we be able to see them, and what's the timeline for maximising that compliance?
Yes, I think, fine, yes, got that. That's one of those that we've got a new leadership team in the HR, and we've got new policies coming in as well, and we are looking at that and looking at the new formats, and the HR module has been corrected with the workaround, so that is working, so those reminders are being sent. I will say that the completion of PDRs is not at the level that we'd want it to be. I don't think that we're uncommon with that being recorded in the system, as it's not uncommon across other local authorities, having spoken and with others and discussed this, but it's something that we do take seriously, because actually the PDRs is the form for employees themselves to be able to consider and bring forward the things that they think are issues and raise issues that may even apply to governance and are relevant to this. So that is one of those things that is getting particular priority with the new staff and the new leadership within HR. And it's probably something that's might be worth a review at this policy committee, at this committee later on in the year, to see where the progress is against that. Perhaps at a 6-monthly point.
Councillor Belby.
Thank you. I wanted to comment first of all. I do think, as you've mentioned, we've had some quite critical comments on our AGS before, and I do think this is a vastly improved format and it feels really easy to read and to follow. So thanks to everybody who's worked on it from that perspective. I do feel it's much, much clearer. I just wanted to ask about, it's on page 53, slide 29, which is the timeline of identifying and resolving governance issues. There is a lot on there that's still ongoing, and I know that you referred in your introduction there to you're going to be looking at that this year, and the Corporate Assurance Board, I think you talked about there, because it does feel that some of those, I think as you said, have gone away, come back, and feel like are consistent issues for us. So I just wonder if there's something we can do about in some of these about when we would expect them to be resolved by in the future, because just telling us they're ongoing in some cases looks as if they will never leave this list. And can we have some kind of understanding and expectation around how long it should take to resolve some issues? I recognise that some of the issues involving backlogs and stuff will, you know, inevitably I think the one about SARs in particular talks about they've got more complex and there's far more of them coming in, and that's always going to impact the timelines. But in general, it'd be helpful to have an understanding of how quickly we could expect to deal with some of these.
I can't give you an update, a date or likely date for each of those, but I think what I will say is that we're going to review those at the next Corporate Assurance Board, whether we'll have that information there or whether that's information that we request at that and bring it back. But what we can do is bring that then to this committee for a review and an update on progress and likely progress and end date. So I think we can do that as well in line with what the Corporate Assurance Boards oversee.
Thank you, David. Any further questions? No, may I ask one then? page 43. I think there's a lot around human resources, isn't there? Which I think has been highlighted throughout the AGS this time round, and it has appeared on a number of occasions previously as well. So I'm not going to dwell on all that because I think we've debated that previously as well. In particular, on just page 43, where it says around an independent review of job evaluation, which was raised in autumn 2023, and I know there's actions happening on this, but I might be getting this entirely wrong, so I apologise in advance. There would be a financial implication if it came out that we were not paying people the salaries that they should be paid, or does that equal itself out? And if there is going to be a financial issue there, is that being taken into account anywhere?
I'll probably let Philip come in that if you want any more, but I think the position is that there is likely to be a financial implication. We don't know what the value of that is yet, but that provision is being made within the accounts for that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So it's a complicated issue where we've got to look at lots of roles across the council and assess whether unequal pay liabilities exist or not. That work is being done thoroughly and in partnership with our 3 recognised trade unions. So that work has probably taken longer than we thought it would do, but we're doing that to make sure we've got a full understanding of what the liability is. We're not in a position yet where we can definitively say this is what the financial liability is from unequal pay. And there are 2 elements to equal pay. One is the historic issue where we might have paid people unequally, and we're looking to address those issues. We're also committed to making sure that that can't happen again in future. And so to put ourselves in the best possible position, we'll be going through a process where we reevaluate every single job in the council and reevaluate that against a new scheme, and that will then also require reevaluation of the pay line going forwards. So we're looking at both of those issues in depth. One is looking historically back at equal pay issues where we have paid people unequally and making sure people are compensated for that, but also then looking forward to how we make sure we don't find ourselves in that position again. And so the financial implications of that will flow through at some point, we expect, during this calendar year, but we don't have the ability to sort of tie those down completely at the moment.
Thank you for that answer from both David and Philip, because the reason I'm concerned about it is because obviously it's a mammoth task within the council. We've got, God knows, thousands of employees, and to go through all that job evaluation, it can be a very difficult, time-consuming task as well. And clearly there will be a financial implication at some stage. But I'm reassured by what you've put in place, that this will be done correctly and there wouldn't be any issues that would be outstanding for years following on from that. Fran?
I was just going to say, Chair, I think it is picked up in the KPMG report that's for later on the agenda as well, in terms of identifying that risk is there and that it can't be quantified at the moment, but I think it is reflected in the accounts and in the later reports.
Just to add to that, we have been discussing with KPMG officers, you know, the progress that we're making on the work we're doing on equal pay, and making sure that they're content with the way that we are approaching this, and making sure that we're understanding each other on when we need to make disclosures in our accounts, and we'll do that at the relevant time in conjunction with conversations with KPMG as our external auditor.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you for the contributions as well. But this is something that most local authorities are facing anyway. We're just one of the larger ones, and our job isn't much bigger than anybody else's. So thank you for that, and we'll keep an eye on it really, because it can have quite a significant effect financially moving forward. And I know KPMG will pick it up as we move forward. Unless there's any further questions, because I forgot to look at this side very often. So is there any further questions? No, there is not. What I'd like to say before going on to the recommendation, that this has been far, as Councillor Belbin has alluded to, being a veteran of this committee, and this has been much easier to read and digest from a member's point of view. So thank you for all the work that's gone into this to make it easier for us. So moving on to the recommendation, which unfortunately I'm going to have to read, is the Audit and Standards Committee is recommended to approve the revised annual governance statement as set out at Appendix 1 of the report. Everybody fine with that? Any dissent? Thank you. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Chair.
Moving on to item number 8. This is the one that has about 300 pages to it now, doesn't it? So we might as well settle in for the day now. Claire and Ruth, if you'd like to present that. Basically just highlight the issues which you want us to be aware of, and any shortcomings. We like shortcomings.
Thank you. So we're here today to update you on the 2023-24 Statement of Accounts and request approval for these accounts. We appreciate that there seems to have been multiple sets of accounts brought for approval in a short time as we meet the backstop dates to catch up from those sector-wide delays that we've had. So these financial statements close the cycle of the 23-24 financial year and report in full the Council's financial performance for that year. The accounts have now been subject to external audit by KPMG, and that process is now almost concluded. There's been a late adjustment since the pack was circulated, which we've sent round earlier today to members, and this is the version that's now ready for you to approve. Once approval is given, the Chair, with delegated authority, and the Section 15 officer, Philip, will both sign the Statement of Accounts and the Letter of Management Representations. That's a letter from the Council to KPMG to provide assurance that we fully disclose everything required of us and complied with all the necessary legislation and guidance so that they can issue their opinion. The signing needs to take place at a date after the meeting, closer to the backstop date, once KPMG has confirmed that the external audit inspection is complete and that we're not subject to any further material variations from these figures. I'll hand over to Ruth just to take you through those changes in more detail.
Thank you.
So just to recap on the process so far, the financial year 23-24 closed on 31st of March last year, and the draft set of accounts were approved by the Section 1 officer, Section 151 officer, and published and provided to our auditors by the statutory deadline of 31st of May last year. On the 20th of June, the draft accounts were presented to Audit and Standards Committee, and by keeping the committee up to date throughout the process, members have had time to thoroughly review them, ask any questions, and since the draft version was brought to the June committee, we have been answering questions to satisfy all queries and have provided detail and extra explanations in writing. Also, on the 12th of November last year, we also arranged for an independent trainer, Ian Fifield, to guide you through the accounts document. So hopefully, members have had lots of opportunities to raise any issues. Since publication, the External Auditors, KPMG, have been inspecting the accounts and have prepared a report for you with their findings and recommendations, which they will take you through in further detail. Finally, just following national consultation, legislation came into force last year, introducing statutory backstop dates, and to comply with those backstop dates, we must have published the 23-24 accounts on the Council's website by 28th of February this year. To summarise, there have been two main changes to this version of the accounts. Firstly, pensions. An audit adjustment of 89 million was processed to correctly account for the pension prepayment. The prepayment had previously been accounted for as short and long-term debtors, but an adjustment was made to correctly account for that against the pension asset. In addition, we previously showed the net pension asset on the Council's balance sheet, but have since amended to correctly show the gross pension asset and the gross pension liability on the balance sheet. Finally, within pensions, we received an asset ceiling report from our actuary, and the net pension asset increased by 2 million, which has been transacted throughout the accounts. The second adjustment we've made was to council dwellings for the housing price index. The council's housing stock is valued using the latest housing price index available at the time of preparing the unaudited accounts. And as more information becomes available, the index updates. Following the latest HPI, as at March last year, the movement was considered material, with a downward movement of 73.9 million on the valuation of council dwellings. Whilst the adjustment was being transacted through the accounts, we took the opportunity to amend other valuations within the balance sheet, and an £11 million, again, downward revaluation was against PPE, the property, plant and equipment, and that was for the heart of the city assets becoming operational. We understand that KPMG are due to issue a disclaimed audit opinion, and KPMG, again, have prepared their year-end report, which they will take you through in further detail.
We'd like to thank KPMG for all their hard work. We're on a schedule now of building back assurance and a more normal timetable for reporting, hopefully. KPMG made really good progress this year to provide a solid basis for this, so thank you to Tim, Matt and their team. We're happy to take any questions on the accounts you may have now, or maybe you'd prefer after KPMG have taken you through their year-end audit report. Thank you.
Councillor Slade.
Page 142, which will be slide 66, I think. The business rate appeals, it's saying there that we were provisioning 19.1 million for 23-24. Do we know where that is at the minute?
Yeah, I think we'd have to come back to you on the detail behind that, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you for all your work on this. My question sort of related to some press sort of misinterpretation of our reserve position that's gone around the last few months, related to our general fund and what our actual usable reserves are. And I was just wondering if you could make a clarification, I suppose, for the record, because it says with 15 million or just over in our general fund, and this is essentially our current account, our overdraft that we can use to dip into. But if you look on page 96 or 20 in the report, we have quite healthy reserves compared to other core cities, and I just wondered if you could give a view on our financial stability as a city compared to others. And
Yeah, happy to pick that up. So, you're right, our general fund is 15 million. We have a healthy level of earmarked reserves, and so to look at that chart that you refer to, you'll see that other core cities have a different balance between the amount they hold in general reserve and the amount they hold in earmarked reserves. So the approach that we've taken is to earmark reserves for specific purposes, to hold those for specific purposes, which are outlined in the budget report, which has just been published for 25-26. We then will review every year as part of the budget setting process our allocation of earmarked reserves. That's to make sure that we've provided for things that we need to provide for within the year, to make sure that we've reviewed whether we need to still hold those earmarked reserves for the purpose they were set aside for, and whether the amounts that we're holding in those are the right amounts for the years to come. So it gives us a degree of flexibility, but also a degree of transparency, where we can show to members and to the public how we and why we've set aside reserves and for what purpose.
Any further member questions? I've just got a... James, you want to ask a question? Thank you. Yeah, first of all, thank you for presenting the report, and you're quite right, Claire and Ruth. We have been kept up to date regularly on how these accounts have been developing. We're almost becoming apprentice accountants now, but yeah, so it's good that. So when it comes here, we're not, it's not in the cold. We've actually been through quite a lot of what's actually in front of us now. Just a couple of comments, and I might be getting this entirely wrong again, so apologies in advance. Around business rates, and I think we're expecting an increase around business rates. But if you look at the property market, the context of where the property market is at the present time, it seems rather optimistic on our part, because clearly retailers started to struggle quite substantially, and a lot of the big chains used to be the biggest business rate contributors, and equally similar around offices as well, which is they seem to be disappearing at a quite alarming rate as well. So the business rates from those areas were quite strong. And then moving into the year, obviously when people start to struggle with their businesses, they will start to, and I think Councillor Slater's touched upon it, start looking at business rates appeals. So it's not so much a question, it's an observation, because I don't think you can probably give an answer to that at this stage, but it's something that we need to be aware of, that might not come to fruition as we expect it to in the accounts. So that's one. You might want to comment on it, so I'll ask all two or three together and then you can comment on them all. The other one was around page 102 and the schools PFIs, which has been in the news this week as well, where schools are starting to come back into local authority, where the contracts are expiring after 25 years, and we're already hearing that a lot of these are not coming back into the condition that they should be coming back in. And if I remember how the contracts were actually done, was that they should be no different from year 1 when they were delivered to us to year 25 when they come back to us. But I dare say that they're not actually going to be anything like that when they do return to us, and therefore there could be quite a financial contribution needed from the local authority. And I know you've got that in hand as well. But again, it's an observation and probably a plea as well to say, look, most of the contracts I know that I've seen should be coming back exactly the same as they were given to us in year 1. So dilapidations is going to be a huge issue that we need to be on top of. Again, something that you can comment or observe on. And finally, and I should know the answer to this one, but I don't, and I just need it clarifying again. When we value local authority housing, do we value it on the basis that it's vacant possession, or do we value it on the basis that they are tenanted? So those are my 3 questions or observations.
If I can answer the housing question, so that it's calculated at vacant possession for social housing. So it's taking what would be a vacant possession value and then reducing it down on a average based on the tenanted rent versus an actual rent that you'd get for a private house. So it's a reduced value as against a private house in a similar condition.
And that discount factor is set by government that we're prescribed to value it down by for that tenanted rate.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I should have known the answer to that, but I've just been a little bit out of touch for a while. Unless there's any further questions, we can go to the recommendations. Sorry, James, forgot.
Sorry, I guess the audit is a separate item, so I'll jump in now if that's okay. Apologies. Yeah, so sorry. So the 15 million general fund reserve was mentioned, but there's also the reserve statement on note 34, and I think we say, and we've got something more in the region of 335 million revenue reserves. So that would be the general fund plus the other sort of earmarked reserves and all the other bits and pieces. Just a couple of notes really. It was noted, I think, by the previous auditors that we were often setting a budget and then overspending in year against the budget. And it was also noted in this committee last time that that was kind of partly strategic in a way, in the sense that we'd set aside a kind of a reserve for overspends. But that's now been used up. My question, I guess, is a bit more forward-looking. I suppose, I know the accounts are backward-looking. We've had the national funding settlement, which has been put a certain amount of additional monies into local government. And we've also had, I guess there's other developments as well. I mean, I don't know if when the next valuation of the pension scheme is, or if there's a review of pension scheme contributions, but I know a lot of pension schemes are looking at cutting employer contributions. How are we looking sort of moving forward in terms of managing these reserves and I guess having enough to cover any kind of unexpected things, possibly equal pay or anything else? Sorry, that's quite a broad question. Just really, it doesn't have to go into loads of detail, I guess.
So, the government have taken a different approach to the allocation of funding for 25-26. So they have taken into account factors for deprivation and also the ability for a council to raise funds through council tax. So that's taking into account councils like Sheffield, where we have a lot of properties that are Band A. So 60% of our properties in Sheffield are Band A properties. Council tax banding goes from Band A to Band H. Band A are the least expensive, Band H the most expensive for council tax. The average is Band D, which is the number that's usually reported when comparing one authority's council tax to another. A 5% increase in council tax for Sheffield will deliver a lower return than it would do a 5% increase in somewhere where there are lots of properties in the higher bands. So for Surrey, for example, who will have a lot of properties who are in the higher band, a 5% increase in council tax will be more beneficial to them. So the way that the government have allocated what they've called the recovery grant is they've targeted that towards councils where there is deprivation and that sort of low band council tax. So what that results in is the average increase in core spending power for local government for 25-26 is 6.8%. So core spending power is a combination of council tax, business rates income and government grant. Combining those together, as I said, there's a 6.8% national increase in core spending power. For Sheffield, our increase is just over 9%. So we're one of the sort of most beneficial authorities in the country in terms of that grant, in reflection of the fact that our deprivation and our ability to raise council tax. So that's the direction of travel that government are taking. Government have committed to a multiple year spending review. So the spending review will come from Treasury and from the Chancellor in spring. We expect that to be in June this year. Following that, there will be then the allocation from Treasury to government departments, and then government departments will need to work through how they allocate the funding to provide the services that they do. So for us, MHCLG, so Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, will be the one that distribute our funding, as they have done previously through this finance settlement. We don't expect to receive our financial settlement from that spending review process probably until November or late December. so similar to this year. That leaves us in a position where we'll have to work through budget planning, as we have done in previous years, looking probably for 1 year, and then do a very quick assessment once we get the settlement, and probably work that through for years 2 and 3 of the settlement, sort of early in 2026. So we will have to sort of plan that through, but that will give us certainty around government funding and our council tax raising ability for the next 3 years. But we don't expect to receive that until we get sort of much later in the year, in the calendar year, just because of the amount of work that MHCLG will have in turning sort of their settlement from Treasury into something that they can allocate out to every local authority. So that's the sort of uncertainty that we live with. So while we welcome having a multiple year settlement, the reality is it doesn't really help us too much in terms of the uncertainty we face until we actually receive it. And that's the point when we can then have the certainty about the future years and we can start to plan for those effectively. In terms of sort of reserves position, I think, you know, we're confident that we are, again, we'll look at reserves annually. We're confident that we are contributing to reserves as well as drawing down from reserves. So the fact that we had set aside a budget contingency reserve to be used over 4 years, it has been used in those 4 years. It was designed to be used in full by the end of 24-25 and will be. We are planning on how we look at demand and inflation, and also as part of the budget setting process, how we prepare ourselves so that we don't have an overspend in the next financial year. So part of our budget setting process for 25-26 has been to look at those areas that have overspent, so where we've agreed the budget and then subsequent to that there's been extra demand over and above what we've budgeted for. Predominantly that's sort of been in 4 areas that we found that. So that has been social care, both adults and children's demand there. Children's will include home to school transport and SEND provision, and then temporary accommodation and homelessness. So those are the main drivers that we've had for the overspend this year and also in previous years. What we've done is we've set aside a provision to support temporary accommodation and homelessness costs for next year, just as we have done in the current financial year. We've also put more money into the budget for home to school transport, and we're also looking at, we'll be putting money aside for expensive placements in social care. So government grant for social care was increased beyond what we expected in our medium-term planning, which is welcome and good news. That money will go directly into social care services, but we are putting more money aside as well for expensive placements in social care. Part of that is recognition that it's not, if you like, the fault of the service that they have to incur expensive placement costs. That's driven by market forces and by private sector involvement in providing social care. However, it's just a reality that at some point during the next year, we are likely to face increased costs from expensive placements in social care. So we put money aside so that we can draw that down during the year. The plan is we will use that money during the year. It's not something that we want to stretch out over multiple years. We recognise that there's a financial pressure there, and we'll be using that corporate budget to allocate to the services against a set of criteria as and when we experience those high cost placements. So what we've tried to do this year is we've received more money from government than we'd expected in the medium-term financial strategy. What we tried to do is look at where we have overspent both this current financial year and the previous ones, and put things in place to mitigate those from the outset and leave us in a position where, should an overspend occur, we already have budget contingency set aside or corporate budget set aside to be able to contribute to those.
Thank you for that, Philip. Is that fine, James? Thank you. Unless there's any further questions, I'll move towards the recommendations. First of all, thank you for everything that you've done, Claire, Ruth and KPMG on this. I think it's a thorough piece of work there. So thank you. The recommendations, again, unfortunately, I'm going to have to read them because there's quite a number of them here. The Audit and Standards Committee is recommended to, number 1, approve the Statement of Accounts for 23-24 as set out in Appendix A, subject to the finalisation of the audit requiring no further changes. Number 2, notes in accordance with the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2015, the Chair of the Audit and Standards Committee and the Director of Finance and Commercial Services will sign the statement of accounts for 23-24 on conclusion of the audit by KPMG. Number 3 notes that the letter of management representations to be submitted to the External Auditor as set out in Appendix B, and this will be signed by the Director of Finance and Commercial Services and the Chair of the Audit and Standards Committee. Everybody fine with that? Fine, thank you. Sorry.
Sorry, Chair, I've been reminded there was one question, James, that you asked that I didn't cover off, was pensions. So we have a triennial valuation, as you're aware. We're working with our actuary, so we pay into the South Yorkshire Pension Authority Fund. We're working with our actuary to look at contribution rates in particular, and the funding of the pension fund over the long term. The fund is over 100% funded, so we're working with the pension fund to be prudent, to make sure that we don't have a sort of peak and trough where we constantly reduce the contribution rate and suffer, and then increase the contribution rate to pay back. There is a stability mechanism that the actuary is working through. We expect to get detail from the pension fund in the next few weeks, which will start to inform their thinking for the next valuation of the pension fund, which will include our contribution rates. So we don't have any definitive numbers for that at the moment, and we expect to have those in the next few weeks, and they will feed into the accounts as appropriate.
Simon?
I happen to sit on the pension board, and this was the discussion that we were having this morning. The pension authority is in the very good situation where it is 150, 160% funded, and obviously, that's not ideal in terms of the people who are putting into the fund, and what they are looking at is to set a target, if you like, of 120% for the larger employers, like Sheffield City Council. Excuse me. And over 15 years, look to reduce the amount that's going in, so that we can get to a level of a prudent level of 120% funded, which gives us the assurance to say, well, if there is some kind of event, like the crash of 2008 or Black Monday, something like that, that there is that buffer to continue to keep it fully funded. So yeah, in terms of that, there will be. That's just those are just the numbers that we're consulting with the members of the pension authority on. But it's going to be of that sort of level, and hopefully it will mean that as I say, large crashes aside, that what the authority, what the council will need to contribute, will be able to be reduced by that amount. Certainly in terms of the current liabilities that have, obviously any liabilities that we're building up through current staff and pensions will need to be fully funded as we're going along. Thank you, Chair.
James?
And that's looking at contributions from 26, 27 onwards, isn't it? So it's not the immediate. So there's a valuation this April in 2025, and that will affect the contributions the following year. Yeah. Okay, cheers.
Thank you, and thank you for that very thorough answer, Philip and Simon filling in there. I don't think I need to go through the recommendations and read them again, do I really? So if everybody's happy with that, we'll move on to the next item. Fine, thank you. The next item has got an interesting title. Report of those charged with governance, ISA 260. I keep thinking I'm reading this wrong, but could get a slightly catchier title next, I think.
I'll try and think of a quicker one next time.
All right, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair, for the opportunity to report our findings for the 23-24 external audit. As you're all aware, the backstop legislation came in following the change in government in September. So that's and I think was outlined by Claire in terms of the backstop for the 23-24 audit was the 28th of February, or will be the 28th of February this year. So the main impact on that is, although we worked and we all planned to try and finish all our work in the year we had, it's meant that we've had to stop our detailed testing, and the impact of that is that a disclaimed audit opinion will be given. You're not alone in that position. I suspect that the majority of local authorities that had a backstop last year will also have a backstop this year, because the period of time between the 2 years is such a short period. However, the information in the report on pages 312 and 313 is basically the audit implications of that backstop being put in place. What we've done on page 313 is try to highlight the work we have completed and the work where we weren't able to conclude. So you'll see quite a list on the left-hand side of that page showing the work we have concluded and some of the areas where we haven't been able to. The actual opinion itself doesn't change when that split of work is different, so it is a clean or just a clear backstop opinion. That said, so what I will go through is working through our significant risks that we identified in the plan, and those are summarised on page 316 through to probably about 328, something like that. So I'll just very quickly go through each one of those, explain where we've got up to in terms of the work and the findings we've carried out. I think sort of touching on the team sort of working that we've tried to employ this year is even where we've not been able to conclude, we've tried to get to a point where we're comfortable with the process that's happening at the authority to try and avoid any issues for the future. So if we're comfortable the process is good and the outcome and the output should be okay, we've gone through that process and we've had challenge and discussions, and so we've come to a position where we're comfortable there. So in terms of, say, valuation of land and buildings, which was our first significant risk, we've managed to complete the council dwellings work, so we're comfortable with the valuation piece and the estimation process. What we haven't been able to do is look through your PPE in terms of the surplus assets, which the majority of it is part of the heart of the city work, and then also the operational land and buildings work. So what we have done is looked through the understanding of that, what's actually in those assets, and we've challenged that position. So we're comfortable that at this stage there's no issues in that area. The next area is management override of controls. This is a standard risk that auditing professional standards require us to have in. It's around your journals processing. We've identified a control deficiency on that, which is reported later in the accounts. So that's the findings on the management override. We've not found any overrides taking place, so there's no issues that we've actually identified. So the next one, in terms of the valuation of pensions, and as Claire and Ruth have said, that's where the adjustments came through. I think Sheffield have got themselves in a complicated position with both underfunded and asset ceiling, and obviously they made a prepayment to take advantage of savings that can be identified from paying that money early. So those three things together make those balances quite complicated, because they all have to be in a position under different auditing standards. So although there was an adjustment, it wasn't as if it wasn't wrong, it was just classifications, and then that meant that they needed to be moved around in the balance sheet. They had no impact on general fund balance. But other than that, we're comfortable on the estimation process that has gone through on the pensions liabilities. Happy with all of that. Then fraud risk of expenditure recognition. this was identified as a risk at the start of the year around the fact that you had a budget which was under pressure. So there is a potential risk there that organisations can manipulate the numbers, and that would show itself as being pushing expenditure into next year, so i.e. not fully completing accruals. During the year, and clearly as we worked through the understanding of that position, that became probably less of an issue because of as we saw the budget monitoring kept a relatively stable position, an understood position. This was one of the areas which we didn't fully complete, but we had no issue. We had no in the testing we completed. There was no issues identified in terms of any manipulation or expenditure in the wrong period. Number 5, which is on page 326 and 327, is a risk around a general ledger migration during the year. So our IT guys came and did some work with the understanding the process and the sort of project management of the migration. No issues there. That was very well organised and managed. And then we then tested the actual data migration, and there was no issues identified on that. So those were the main risks we identified and provided. So on page 328 and 329 is really showing our understanding of your estimates that you've included in your accounts, the main ones, which again being the defined benefits and the council dwellings. That's showing the work we've done to assess those assumptions and assertions that have been put together into the main estimates. And overall, we see those as a balanced set of assumptions for pensions. In terms, you've just been through the audit misstatement, so the main audit misstatement we found was obviously to do with the pensions, and that's been identified on page 30 and the details further on. I think from a, we won't go on to value for money because that's in sort of the next report, so we'll probably just leave that for now. So I think the only other parts I would like to sort of highlight is on page 340, 341 is an outline of the reset and recovery. So clearly this is year 1 of a period of time to try and get back into the what was known as the normal timetable. So that will just give you an understanding of the backstop dates for the future years and how we will work with the finance team to try and get back to a point where we can give a full opinion for your statements of accounts. On page 343 is the required communications, which we would have to provide you as part of auditing standards. Then on page 344 is a summary of the audit fees. And just a very high, all of this information is subject to PSAA and agreement with Philip as the Director of Finance, is to understand, so there's a PSAA scale fee, which is the first line in the account, in that table. We're suggesting, and that again subject to, is that we will have a discount for the work that we haven't finished, and then there's a number of bits of scope variations which are things we have done which weren't in the original price, so that's, as you say, that's just an outline, and hopefully that will all get sorted out over the next sort of 3 to 4 months. And then on page 345 is our confirmation of our independence, highlighting on page 346 two other pieces of work that we will be doing which haven't been done as yet, but we will provide services on housing benefits and teachers' pensions for the council. There's on 348 and 349 is the corrected and one uncorrected audit statement, which is a judgmental understatement of a disclosure of fair value of your LOBO loans, which we understand won't be corrected in the accounts, which we're comfortable with that because it's below our materiality. So I think I'll just leave it there for now and take questions.
Thank you, Matthew. Questions from Councillor Slater, Councillor Cameron-John Starr, Councillor Slater.
So looking at the page 314, 315, 316, the land, valuation of land and buildings side of things, what's the sort of time frame for getting that completed?
So I think, so there's two elements to it. There's one, the actual valuation, and then there's two, the bit that we haven't audited, and that wasn't audited last year by Ernst Young. So there will be a piece of work needed to look at the additions and disposals in the year that wasn't done. So we will do a risk assessment piece of work to say, are those material from a number point of view against our materiality? If they are, we would probably have to go back and do some audit work to test those additions and disposals to ensure that the validity of the fixed asset register is complete. So that's sort of that piece. And then because we haven't done the valuation, we would only have to do the valuation in the year at the end of the year. So if there is and if we call it this, if there's 100% valuation done at the end of 24/5, we will be able to say that the value at the end of the year is right. The likelihood is it might be a phased view because it's probably a percentage will be valued in next year and then might be a percentage the year after. So that potentially could be a 1 or 2 year process depending on where we get to with that valuation. Does that cover? Yeah.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. Obviously, this is you've given us a disclaimed audit, and our job really as an audit committee is to look for that sort of comfort and assurance that a non-disclaimed audit gives us. Really, I suppose the question is around that audit is, in practical terms, what is the effect of that on the start point for 24-25 and our hopefully confidence levels in that, and will you be doing any work kind of outside that process, if you like, to make sure that those starting balances are correct, and that we can hopefully get more assurance going forward, so that obviously we can hopefully get a non-disclaimed audit in 24-25, and is that possible, or will we continue to feel the effects of this?
Okay, I think if we start with the timetable that's outlined in here in terms of building back assurance, there will be an impact on your opinion for a number of years, maybe 2 to 3 years, and just parking that. However, what they're also going alongside at the moment is a discussion with the FRC and the NAO is to understand what audit. FRC is the Financial Reporting Council. So basically our regulator, and then the NAO, which is the National Audit Office, who set the code of audit practice for local authorities. So they're the sort of stakeholders in our world. So that they've set out, or there's a consultation going on at the moment in terms of what auditors would be expected to do to build back that, exactly what you're saying, that assurance on the opening balances. So there's a piece of work going around for us to try and piece together and agree with them what that looks like. And at the moment, the main problem, in inverted commas, is what the reserves position was for the missing period. Because I think for most of if you look at the balance sheet, the top half and then the reserves underneath, the top half will be able to audit the year-end position because there is some third-party evidence that's actually there which is provable. It's the reserves position because you've got a brought forward reserve. The movements in the year is okay, but it's the brought forward position that needs to have that audit scrutiny in effect. And I think that's the conversation that's going on at the moment. So hopefully we will get a solution to that. But that is exactly the point I think you're making, Sam, is in terms of trying to get that assurance so we can then say at the year of end of 24, 25 or 25, 26, there's your clean opinion and you're back square. So I think it's a watch that space, but we are working with regulators to try and get to that position. And all the firms are in the same position, so.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. In the audit report, does there need to be an audit, like a stated audit opinion? I don't know if... Appreciate a disclaimed audit opinion is sort of unusual territory, but usually you get like a fairly boilerplate audit opinion.
Yeah, so at this moment, because and from our firm's point of view, that's commonly known as an unmodified opinion with the clean opinion. A disclaimed opinion is a modified opinion, so that needs to then get our risk teams to approve those opinions. That all of the opinions are being approved at the moment. So unfortunately, we couldn't provide the wording for it. I'm happy to share a version with Philip, and who can share them to the committee when that opinion is agreed.
I don't see that as a major issue, Chair, but that sounds like a sensible recommendation. Could I ask one or two more questions?
Yeah.
The report's quite comprehensive for a disclaimed opinion. Could you give us a brief, very, very brief sort of overview of how much work you did? I mean, did you do substantive audit work this year, or was it a review engagement? Or
No. We set off on the plan to do a full substantive piece of work, and I think where we probably got to in work times, I think we'd done nearly everything. Or I would say we started everything. It was one that started everything and provided very little assurance, I know. But it was very much as we were working through, we worked really closely to try and clear as many of the things down. I would say, and that sort of supported by the sort of fee discount, is we were probably 90-95% there. And I think the one main area I think was the PPE around the surplus assets, which we didn't give that that was the one real piece of work which took the hit, I think, but simply because we're getting another valuation next year. So that rather than looking at some of the internal, so things like payroll, we did substantive testing, expenditure we did. Income testing we did, so we did quite a bit around the council tax and the NNDR income streams. So I would say it was, you're at the top end of nearly finished, which I felt very frustrated, and I'm sure the financial team did as well.
It felt like a very thorough audit. We were almost there, I think.
Yeah, that's our sort of thinking as well.
I mean, that probably answers my last question as well, which was on the fee, because I can see it is pretty much most of the fee. I mean, ballpark, what would you be looking to charge if you'd been able to complete all of the work?
So the PSAA scale fee is what we would have. That's in effect delivery of a full scale audit there.
So that's on page 344.
Yeah.
Thank you for the answers on that. And any other questions before I move on to mine? No? No, it's very thorough what you've done and very well presented again. I think we're getting very well presented reports today, which is quite nice. So thank you for that. Mine's more of a comment or just an observation, really. When you look at page 314, I think you've touched upon it already, but it's around valuation of land and buildings. We have documented a control deficiency linked to the management review of assumptions. I think you might have touched upon it, but if you can just sort of make it clear for me, really.
Yeah, so where an auditor identifies a significant risk in a plan, we then have to identify a management review control. So we'd expect, as we're saying, that we think it's a significant risk, that there's a risk of material misstatement. So we'd expect management to put into place a management review control. They are very high bars to actually pass. So for something like evaluation, to actually get that standard, you would need to there'd need to be somebody who has the experience to understand the assumptions of valuation. They would have to set them out in advance. They'd have to then check them, challenge them, and basically, I would say, in effect, do what our specialists have done, is to understand at each level what those assumptions should be and what was actually reported, and is that appropriate. So a lot of organisations look at that and go, actually, we've employed a specialist to provide us our valuation. That's the control that they've put in place, and they're comfortable with that. And if management are comfortable with that, we would be happy just to have that as a point in year one, and then we can have that just as a comment going forward. That, you know, we have a recommendation there because that's the requirements of the audit standard, but it's very much around if Philip is and the team are happy that their arrangements of employing a third-party valuer to provide you with your valuation, that's fine, and we can leave it at that.
No, thank you for that. As I say, I'm very pleased with the way you're actually going about it, which is quite thorough, really, and you're testing it quite well. So yeah, thank you for that answer, and I get it. Just a final one, so just sticking to the evaluation theme here. One is, I think you mentioned again on page 314, we have not been able to conclude on our review of the assumptions over these valuations. We're particularly looking at DRC valuations for people who are not aware of DRC. Yeah. That's depreciated replacement cost. So if you've got a school, it'll cost £40 million to build, but yet the value, the open market value, might well just be about £1 million or £2 million. So sometimes the accounts can look rather inflated in terms of how much assets we've actually got. And is that sort of...
So I suppose the requirement is to value your assets at fair value, and then there's a number of steps. So the first step is there a market value which can be relied on, and there isn't really a buying and selling of a school. So they're assessed as being called specialist assets. So then you work down into from a specialist assets point of view is you value at depreciated replacement cost. So in a way, what they're saying is there is X number of metres squared of a school, and there are industry indices to say how much a metre squared would be of a school for a primary school, secondary school, a school with a swimming pool, a school with sports centre. So there's a number of indices that they have. So your depreciated replacement cost is basically the size, the floor space of your schools or offices, etc., multiplied by those indices, and that's how it's calculated. So as you say, it might be completely different to what actually you've paid for, and this is where sometimes school design and design of buildings, if you have a huge entrance hall, for example, that might be seen not as a part of the school because you're not actually teaching in that school, if that makes sense. So it costs a lot and the design looks lovely, but actually in the valuation that might disappear as an impairment.
No, thank you for that, Matthew. The reason I wanted to highlight that was because a lot of people see that the actual accounts and they look at it and say we're worth about £1 million in property values.
Yeah.
But really, we're not worth £1 million. We're probably worth far less than that, because a lot of the valuations that have actually gone into the report are depreciated replacement cost valuations. So I know members, when they look at it and they look at the main figures, sometimes if you're not aware of what's behind those figures, it can look rather inflated, and people say, well, hang on, they've got so much money, why are they not spending on this, and why are they not spending it on that?
Yeah.
But when you're valuing schools, or you're valuing, I don't know, cemeteries even, things like that, they're not actually worth what they might be worth on the books in terms of if you put it on the open market value. So that's why I was highlighting that particular point.
Yeah, that's correct, Chair. And I think the other parts are sort of add, and I suppose this is the important piece of the capital and pensions numbers, is if you look at the unusable reserves, which is your capital adjustment account and your pensions reserve, they're not... Philip will understand. Philip will say, I can't use those. So, you know, those in effect are reflected as unusable reserves, which, you know, so it's the usable elements of the reserve which are important for your understanding of the financial position, probably more than the asset value.
Thank you for that. And unless there's any other further questions, and I don't want to indulge myself on valuation, to be honest with you, but we can have hours on that one. But yeah, unless there's any further questions, we'll move on to the recommendation. And the recommendation is the Audit and Standards Committee is recommended to note the contents of this report. Everybody's fine with that?
Where does the value for money report
Right,
come in?
so we'll go through there's the annual auditor's report as well, which I think was an appendices to my report. So I think I've been through the first report.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Just got excited over valuations.
So
carry on, Matthew.
That's fine, yeah. So this report is actually the report that will go on the Council's website, and it's the public-facing report at the end. So when we've finished the work off and sign the opinion. So this is a draft version of that. So the executive summary on page 361 outlines whether we've reported any public interest reports, is there any judicial reviews, anything from that legal front, which obviously, you know, we've said there's none of those that we've seen. We identify the whether we've made any statutory recommendations under the Local Government Act and the Local Audit and Accountability Act, of which there's none of those. So I think that's a clean bill of health from the executive summary. We then move on to page 363, which is the audited financial statements. So it's basically a summary of the other reports. So I suggest we don't touch on that at all. So then on page 369 is our value for money requirement. So we're required under the Code of Audit Practice to comment on the Council's arrangements for securing value for money, and that's done under 3 domains, which is financial sustainability, governance, improving economy effectiveness and efficiency. So I think you'll have seen a risk assessment that I think we brought to the December committee, which I highlighted where we, following from our initial risk work, we saw the risks. We identified 2 significant risks, of which one of them has turned into a significant weakness. So on page so on the improving economy effectiveness and efficiency domain, the weakness identified is around the housing services provision, with regard to the fact that having a judgment from the housing regulators in effect saying it's not effective, the delivery of the housing service. we followed that up with interviews with the, I think it's an interim director at the moment of housing, and we are comfortable with the arrangements that are in place going forward. So obviously there's the regulator, the conversations and the information flows. So in terms of the recommendation we're making is very much around continue to work with the regulator and deliver the action plan that's already in place. So hopefully going into 24-25, that will probably be a monitoring position, and then into 25-26, looking to come out of that probably following the improvements and the deliveries that hopefully will happen. Other than that, we're comfortable that the council has adequate arrangements in place. What we did report was 2 actual performance improvement opportunities. We're not allowed to put them in the VFM report, but they're in the other report. So they're actually on page 352, which are just some areas of improvement. As we're working through our work, was very much around trying to, and I think we've already touched on one, which was the budget work around adult services, around understanding how demand gets fed through into the budget process to make that a smoother and providing opportunities to allow, as Philip explained, that demand driven budget setting. And then I think the other weakness was around the establishment of the employees' establishment list. There appeared to be some sort of localised work being taken place which isn't using the establishment as the control that service departments were using, or the controls, not to bypass but to understand their budget position. So there's just a couple of recommendations in there which officers have accepted. So I think other than that, I think that's our position on VFM, and understanding that document will turn as the public reporting that will go on their website.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Hurst.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you, Matthew. I know you said some very difficult things in here, but you said them in a way that enabled us to understand them and take some comfort from them. So thank you very much for that, and thank you for all the work that's gone into the preparation of this. I wanted to ask around that value for money weakness, the housing stock one, which appears in pages 336 to 338 of the report, and then also 382, 383. I mean, we as members are aware that of the diminishing quantity of our public housing stock and at a time of increased demand, and the fact that, shall we say, the condition of the stock that we've got is perhaps the most challenging, and that, as you mentioned, that we have a stock condition survey that has been promised for a while, but added to that we've got the housing regulator's judgment and the impact that all that is almost a perfect storm it could have on our ambitions for climate change. And I think the recommendation that you've made is a very fair one, that we engage and that we to deliver on the action plan, and that we monitor and look at indicators and ensure that we're delivering. But I think the question that I wanted to ask is that as auditors and having that significant value for money risk in your minds, is that something that you'll be paying attention to so that we can, I don't know, I think it's going back to assurance again, isn't it? That you're able to keep an eye on it and make sure that it's going the right way as the judgment is fulfilled and then falls away.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose from our point of view, our responsibility is probably one step removed from the real detail day to day. But what we will be doing is following the monitoring of the interaction between yourself and the regulator. And obviously this is a relatively new for yourself into the council, but where we've had similar conversations with regulators in the past, sometimes we can even have correspondence with them to actually say, are they really comfortable with the progress? So it's very much around looking at how because the regulator's the gatekeeper of that that knowledge. So we'll use that to see how well you are, are you on track. I think one of the sort of the key elements which we sort of touched on with the interim director was very much around making sure that the data and the information that was being used was actually starting to unpick some of the problems and then being able to deal with them. So I think you're probably still on a journey, is how I would probably suggest, is that you're on a journey both in terms of working with a regulator but also unearthing issues that then need to be addressed. So I think you're probably at the start of the journey rather than that was the sort of feeling of the conversation. So I wouldn't be expecting to come along this time next year and say actually the regulator's giving you a clean bill of because I think there was some actions which were 6 to 18 months. So so I think it's a journey that's going to take a period of time. But from our point of view, we will work with what's we're not going to add to the burden. If that's it, we're going to use the information that's in the domain already.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you for that. And thank you for the report. I mean, is there any other questions before I ask mine? No? Page 379 is of interest to me, which is the heart of the city stuff where you've mentioned the construction phase of the schemes are coming to an end. The council have significant levels, 290 million of assets currently classified as surplus assets as of 31st of March 24. And then I think you comment on market conditions, I think, which we alluded to earlier on in a previous item. Do you think there is a significant risk there?
Sorry?
Do you think there is a significant risk there?
What I think we're trying to allude to there is not necessarily that the value's the issue. It's understanding how the council want to manage those properties going forward. So whether they're looking at that in terms of potentially selling, holding on to, leasing, using as operational. So I think the conversation is very much more around what are the plans and then where does that lead you in terms of the valuation, because as we said earlier, the valuation of an operational asset might be different to a valuation of an investment property. So I think it's very much designed around understanding the plans and then taking decisions from a council's point of view on how you would want to use those assets going forward. And then, whether some of those valuations will actually turn into real money is a different, that's something which I think is more, in terms of the council's decision making. If that makes sense.
Thank you for that. Any further comments, questions? No. The recommendation is to note the contents of the reports, if everybody's fine with that, and we'll move on to the next item. Thank you, Matthew, for that. Okay. Item number 10, Internal Audit Recommendation Tracker Progress Report, one of our standard reports, Linda. So, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to introduce now, this is the recommendation tracker. Like you just said, it comes to this audit committee every 6 months and it's a rolling report. So the recommendations don't get taken off until they've been fully implemented. So just in summary, it highlights the recommendations made for our no assurance opinion reports and limited assurance high organisational impact. And the audit committee members get the full report when it's issued as final. On this report, the rolling programme, it's got, the first time is the establishment control recommendations have been added this time. but we've also got 3 new reports that have been added. They relate to recruitment process, family time and community equipment and adaptations. The recommendations aren't in this report because the timeline hasn't lapsed yet for the implementation. So the next report that will be presented in 6 months, it will include those three reports as well. So in summary, there's 19 recommendations we're tracking. 7 have been implemented fully, so that's 37%, and 12 are ongoing. And we have done quite a few of those relate to the debtors controls audit, and we've just done a follow-up review on that, and all the recommendations have got actions, and we've seen progress, so they haven't been fully implemented. So on page 390, that highlights the 4 reports that we're tracking with the 19 recommendations. And you'll see from there, there's 2 ongoing critical rated recommendations. And on page 388, that explains that the first one relates to debtor controls, and that's in relation to appointing a social work post to help process those debts. It has gone out to recruitment, but it's been unsuccessful. So again, we can see that they've been trying to get somebody in post. They have had an alternative in there, just where they've called on a social work as the cases have required. But again, the council staying that long term, they need a permanent person to that post, so that's ongoing. And then the other outstanding critical recommendation, that's related to establishment control. Again, we have seen progress in this area, but it's not fully implemented yet, so there isn't a fully robust reconciliation yet between the payroll and budget, but that is progressing, and there is a project in place to implement that. And then this report goes in full first before it comes to this committee to the Corporate Assurance Board. So that went in January 25. The key points to highlight there, they did go through the critical recommendations, and they also went through the red recommendations. And what we agreed in future, I will take the red and the critical recommendations to DLT, to whichever director that relates to prior to this committee, to get their view and commitment as well to progressing these recommendations. And then finally in the report you'll see Heritage Park, which is now Willow Park School, it is now converted to an academy. So there's 1 recommendation in there that's outstanding that relates to an asset register. However, what I've done, I've had communications with the chair for the trust, so that's the Team Education Trust, and they've agreed to take that recommendation over, so they're going to track that, make sure that's implemented. And they have mentioned that they're going to actually get the school onto their asset register and get them onto the software that they use. So that is in hand. So I have recommended that we remove that recommendation at Heritage Park. However, like I said, there is just the 1 recommendation outstanding, so we don't normally get that. Normally we don't take them off till they've been actioned. But again, that's not our responsibility now, it's the governing body. So the recommendations, what I'm asking for is to note the content of the report and then agree the removal of Montgomery residential home, because all the recommendations have been actioned for the residential home, and then to remove the Heritage Park or Willow Park as it is known now, and hand that over to the Team Education Trust to review in future. So if there's any questions.
Thank you, Linda. Any questions, comments? No? We'll move on to the... Sorry, James, go on.
So, yeah, sorry, I was just, let's start. I guess just to highlight that the numbers behind this are quite significant, and also presumably there are many kind of vulnerable people involved in this kind of debt collection. And the vacancy of the posts came to the audit committee 6 months ago, I think the previous time you brought this report. And I noticed, so that was an issue, and I noticed it affected some of the other recommendations as well, that hasn't been recruited to. It says revised implementation date September 2025. I mean, and then it also affects the one about the panel not being able to meet to review some of the complex cases. Yeah, I just wanted to question what are the reasons why that's taken so long. Is there something that this committee is comfortable with? In terms of the numbers behind it, there's local taxpayers and NNDR, which I think includes business rates as well, so this is slightly misleading, but the total debtors figure is like 136 million, and after impairment it's 53.8 million, which is a 9 million rise on last year as well. So just to put it in the context of the number in the accounts as well.
Yeah, you're right. So in relation to the, like I said, the recruitment and social work, they it had gone through all the processes, so they put a resource request form through, it went out, they advertised, and they did go for the interview stage, but there wasn't, they didn't want to just recruit, they wanted to make sure the right person was appointed to that role, so they didn't actually have a successful appointment then. So it's going out again, so they said to us that even though the RCF, the Resource Control Form, has been approved in January 25, they're going through out for advert now. So that is why they put September 25, because they wanted to make sure, you know, with the recruitment process and getting somebody in post, and then whatever notice period they've got. So that's why they did sort of go for a bit longer, September 25. And like I said, that links on to the panel point, because again, they, in the response and the update when we did the follow-up, they said that they really needed that social work post. They're the ones that take the cases to the panel as well. So that was why the panel hadn't been fully meeting and fully functioning. So that's why those two are linked. Yeah.
It's listed as critical. It sounds like a
yeah, like I said, that's critical. So that is, yeah, and what like I say, so what I'm going to do is going to DLT on those anyway. So I'll be going to the adult DLT to discuss progress on those. And like I said, we've done this as a follow-up audit as well. So it's in this recommendation track and a separate follow-up audit report. So we'll be monitoring it on two methods. Yeah.
Thank you for that, James, and thank you for raising it, and thank you for your answer. Any further comments? No? Just go to the recommendation, which is to note the content of the report and agree to the removal of the following reports from the tracker: Montgomery Residential Home and Heritage Park Community School, now known as Willow Park. Fine with that. Thank you so much. Work programme. Don't know whether you pick that up, Philippa, or David does.
Thank you, Chair. The draft work programme for 2024 to 25 is in your agenda packs from page 411 onwards. The recommendation is to approve the work programme, so please have a look and note the programme ahead. Thank you.
Any comments on the work programme moving forward? No? Well, the Audit Standing Committee is great. We approve the work programme. That was an easy one. Thank you so much. Moving on to the next item, this is where it will not be webcast, as it's mentioned, it's excluded from the press and public, so we'll take 2 minutes. Yeah. But I do agree that future meetings can be looked at for 2 o'clock. Thank you. Thank you. That